Welcome to Illo Talk. I am Cory Kerr. This is episode 119, where I'm going to talk about the difference between tiny short bursts of work versus long sessions. And for me personally, 4 3-hour sessions a week is way more effective than 7 30-minute sessions. I'm going to change up the way I'm doing things. I'm going to go back to the way I did them prior to my master's degree, which was crazy intense, and prior to 100 days, which is awesome, but also crazy intense. And I'm not really like throwing down a challenge or anything, but if you guys wanted to do something along these lines, I'm going to talk about why this works for me and some of the downsides of some of the other things. So the 100 days was awesome, and I learned how to animate in After Effects really well, and it forced me to do that really quickly. The cool thing about it was that it was every day, no matter what. Every day you showed up and you sat down and you did something. The downside to it was, as I approached the 80s and 90s, I got super burnt out. And I started doing the minimum. And the minimum is 30 minutes. And Kevin Cross, who invented the 100 Days of Making Comics, and kind of kicked all this whole thing off, and was the one that gave me the idea to do 100 Days of Animation. He pointed out at the end of his most recent 100 days, which I think is the 4th time he's done that, he pointed out that if you do 30 minutes a day for 100 days, you've basically done a week's worth of work. You've done 50 hours of work if you're doing that full time. And then there's others. I was watching the Artcasters the other night. And if you guys don't watch that, you got to check it out. It's really awesome. It was live, and they were talking about, I will link to this video in the description. Maybe a card will come up now. I don't know if it did or not. Depends on whether I go back and edit this. But they were talking about, like, go big or go home, right? Like, hustle and work hard and quit making excuses and just do stuff. And ironically, I had sat down to play some video games. I've got my projector, got this giant 10-foot wide screen, and I've got my Steam computer hooked up to it, and I do use that to like relax and wind down. I also get distracted by it and will blow an evening occasionally. But they came on, I saw the notification, and I like listening to things while I play video games. I listen to books, or while I'm mowing the lawn or whatever. And so I was like, oh, cool, I'll listen to this. So I flip it on, it's live, and they're just like, if you're wasting your time, you're a horrible person, you're not a real artist. They didn't really say that, but it was kind of the tone that I took from it, and I was like, oh, I've got to change it up, man. I've got to do something different. So anyway, I finished up my game, Rocket League. Do play Rocket League if you get a chance. It is phenomenal. Love it. Finished that up. I hit my drawing board. And I had been really, like, the last week and a half. I don't know if you guys have ever had a car that isn't firing on all the cylinders. Like, a lot of the power is out and it's kind of jerky. I felt like that with my art. Like, I had done this drawing. I had this idea of kind of like an Ursula, like a mer creature, but without a fish. You had octopus. And I couldn't get her, like, armor correct across, like, the chest plate. Super frustrating. And so then I moved on to this other idea. Really awesome concept where it was just like a weird looking dude, with like an exposed brain, kind of piloting a mech, and we're like super close in on him. And I sketched that out and everything, but I just felt like I was trying to push a rope up a hill, or nail jello to a wall. It just wasn't clicking. I wasn't firing on all cylinders. And anyway, so last night I sat down and I was listening to this book, which I will tell you guys about sometime because it's amazing. I love this book. Really good, and I think most artists need to listen to it or read it if you're into that, whatever. Personally, I like to listen to things while I draw. But and I was finishing up this Artcasters that was about hustle. Like if you want to be a pro artist, quit making excuses and do it, right? And so it's good motivation, right? And this book is about the book I was listening to before and after that Artcasters was The Gifts of Imperfection. The Gifts of Imperfection is written by a shame researcher, somebody who researches the triggers of shame spirals and how to avoid those shame spirals so that you can experience joy more frequently and contentment more often and be present in the moment and things like that. Which, for somebody with imposter syndrome, I'm very familiar with shame cycles, and I'd like to learn how to not have them. So anyway, so I'm listening to that, and I just drew. I just inked, right? I started inking, and for me, inking is very cathartic. I love inking. I love the challenge of how to get values out of a single value, like how to get a gradation, how to get a transition, how to control and manipulate the perceived value with just black or white, right? So I don't do like ink washes or anything like that or zip tones. Anyway, I was just inking. And I remembered a comment the first time I was on the Artcasters with Scott Circlin and Joshua Kemble. I remember I was talking to those guys, and what I used to do prior to the 100 days was I would try to get in, 12 to 20 hours a week. And I would get that in large chunks. There were huge parts of my Saturday where I could blaze through, 6 to 10 hours, of work, and I would put in, a few nights of 3 to 6 hours a session, and you do a few of those, and it adds up pretty quick. And last night I went from 10 to 2, and I had to force myself to go to bed because I needed to get up and go to work in the morning. But by the time 2 o'clock rolled around, I was firing on all cylinders. I was just flying, and I felt like I didn't have to force it anymore. Like it was just coming. If you want to use the Greek philosophy thing, the muse was with me, and I was just flowing, right? And it was sick, and I loved it. And it's been a couple weeks since I had that feeling of just pure inspiration flowing, and just that creative cycle where production begets motivation, right? Work produces more motivation, which makes you want to work more, which produces more motivation. And there's this feedback cycle. You're seeing a lot of progress on the page, and you're just going. I love that. And I realized that the downsides of something like the 100 days, and I'm not knocking the 100 days. I loved it. I learned a lot from it, and I would do it again. If I were to go back in time, I would do it again because it was very valuable. But the downside to it is once I start to burn out and I'm just doing a minimum of 30 minutes, I can't get started in 30 minutes. I'm not warm. Up here where I live, if you go outside in the winter and you start a car and it's -10, -15 outside, and you go from that car sitting out all night to 60 miles an hour, that's going to rip that engine apart. And so what you do is you start it and you kind of let it idle for a few minutes and you let it warm up, On my motorcycle, I rarely go from sitting there for 8 hours to starting it and just take off. You rev it a little bit, you let the engine kind of work out the kinks and whatnot. Anyway, so the 30 minutes, like, it takes me sometimes 45 to 60 minutes just to get warm. And this is hugely frustrating when we're talking about personal projects and passion projects, because if it takes you 60 minutes to warm up, sometimes that's all you've got. And if you're trying to do it every day, it can get to the point where you start putting in time rather than working effectively. And art is work. That's why it's called art work. Another thing that they pointed out last night that I really liked. And so if I just come in and I just chunk it, just tiny little snacks, right? I don't get everything out, and it becomes this frustration cycle where I begin to not work long enough to get effective results, which in that feedback becomes frustration, and that frustration feeds my procrastination to where I find other things that I need to do, and I push it off and push it off and push it off until it's super late, and I've compressed the amount of time that I have to work into this short little thing, and that cycle repeats to where I don't have enough time to warm up, and so I keep going. So I started thinking about a question that Joshua Kemble asked me, and Scott and Josh were talking to me while I was in the middle of my 100 days. I think I was in the 80s. I was almost done. And I was telling him, because Scott was saying, it's rough, isn't it? Because he was doing it too. I was like, it is, dude. It is so hard. And at the time, I had burnt out. I had been doing it too many days in a row without a break. And I was starting to get that negative feedback loop to where I would procrastinate or I was just too tired. I would procrastinate until I didn't have a ton of time, and so I could only do the minimum, and I would push, and I would do the 30 minutes, which wasn't enough time to warm up, which wasn't enough time to get any real results, and so I got poor results, and that was frustrating, which caused me to not be super excited about it. So, last night, and Josh asked me this. He said, well, which one do you think is more effective? Trying to get in, 12 to 20 hours a week, or doing it every day. And I said, well, I think for building an audience, I think the 100 days is amazing. And for getting into the habit, 100 days is really good, right? A huge amount of progress in a short amount of time. I mean, a third of a year, and I went from, a few months, and I went from not knowing anything about After Effects to proficient. I wouldn't say expert at all by any means, but proficient, which is good. I mean, I can do 80-90% of everything that I wanted to learn how to do without having to look it up or Google it or whatever at this point. And so that was super effective for learning a skill in a short period of time. It was awesome. For making progress on a project, it was rough. And so what I used to do prior to my master's, which was crazy, and prior to the 100 days, which was crazy, was I would make sure that I got in huge chunks of time, but it wasn't necessarily every night. And so because it wasn't every night, I was able to recuperate, and I was also able to keep on top of it. And I think I need to systematize that because I've been pushing so hard for so long with my master's, and then with the 100 days immediately following, kind of that. And I kind of pushed through all that. Anyway, there's a series of things just right in a row, boom, 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 that made it so I haven't taken a break in a long time. And so I just, how do I want to say that? I've been spinning my wheels. It's not that I haven't been producing anything. You guys have seen the stuff that I'm working on. And it's not that I'm not getting progress or whatever, but I'm not getting the exponential mountain climbing progress that I was getting when I was chunking time rather than snacking on time. And so I'm going to switch it up. And here's what I'm going to do. This is my new plan, and I really like this, and I'm going to try this for 2 months solid. and I'll keep you guys updated. But my new plan is 12-hour minimums. I do a week, and I'm going to get in 12 solid chunks, 90 minutes per session at least. So at no point in time will I do less than 90 minutes when I sit down to draw. And so the way that works is this. If I need a day off, I can take a day off. If I want to go out on a date with my wife without having anxiety over the not working on my project, I can do that. If I want to take a night and play video games all night or hang out with my daughter or whatever, I can do that. The idea is that in any 3-day period, so now and rewind 72 hours, 6 of those hours have to be work. 6 of those hours have to be drawing time on the art desk. And so if I do an hour and a half stint, the next day I probably need to do another 90-minute stint. But if I do 3 hours, and the next day I do, another 90 minutes or whatever, like I'm sitting pretty good. Or if I do 3 to 5 hours, which is typical. I mean, I've gotten to the point where I can sit down and I can work for 5 hours after a full day's work, and that's not a problem if my schedule's open. So in any 3-day period, I need to get 6 hours of work in, and any session can't be shorter than 90 minutes. And the reason for that is this. The reason for that is if you take old rusty pipes, and I think we're all made of old rusty pipes. Okay. Well, I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you 2 stories. So one time I was hiking in the high Sierras. And so as a teenager, we used to go on these big 60-mile plus hikes, 14,000 feet elevation. And you're out there for like 9 to 12 days and whatever. So my brother was out of the country for a couple years and came back. And we were welcoming him back. And we said, hey, let's go on a hike. And so we summited Mount Whitney, which is the highest point in the continental 48. I think there's some stuff in Alaska that's higher, but in the lower 48, it's the highest point. It's a 14,000 plus summit. And so we summited Whitney, and I was coming back to Idaho. Whitney's in California. Everybody else was going south down to the Central Coast. And so I drove through Death Valley, and I was driving a car that I spent $1,000 on. And let me give you an idea of this situation. So the idea is this. Before you enter Death Valley, there are signs, a lot of them, right in a row, that are basically like, hey, if you don't completely trust the mechanics of your vehicle, don't drive any further. You will die. If your car breaks down, there might not be another human being on these roads for days, and it's hot, and you will die. And there's a bunch of stuff like, don't enter here unless you have 3 gallons of drinking potable water in your car with you. And it's like all these rules. And I'm looking at my car and I'm like, this car's a piece of crap. And it's scary. And so I'm going. And I stopped at a place called Stovepipe Wells. Stovepipe Wells is one of the most interesting places on the planet because it's in the middle of Death Valley. It is a weird little resort. Like, I stopped at this place and there's like a swimming pool, and there was like, I don't know, half a dozen cars that were there. And I was like, Eddie, cousin Eddie, what is going on? And it was like the weirdest roadside attraction. I can't even describe it. It was like, it should have been a ghost town. There was no reason for it to exist. And I don't know who lived there and like cooked the food in the restaurant. Like, who lives in Stovepipe Wells? It's like hours away from anything in the middle of Death Valley. And there's like a swimming pool and a restaurant and a little like motel where you would bring your family and swim in 120-degree heat or something. It was so weird. And I had already drunk all of my water, and I was super thirsty. My AC was cranked, and it was still cooking in my car, and my heater temperature was, the heat temperature was pretty high, and so I needed to kind of let my car cool off a little bit, which it wasn't. Even though it wasn't running, it was so hot it wasn't going to get cooler. And I went over to get some water, and there is like a legit hand pump, like little water thing. And so I start pumping it. I'd done a little bit of this before with some stuff on my grandpa's farm, but I was pumping it and pumping it and pumping it, and I heard the water coming. And before the water showed up, I just got a powerful knockback stench of sulfur. I was like, oh, it's sulfur water, which is, if there's not too much sulfur, you can drink it. If there's too much sulfur, it's still like, you can still drink it, but you can run the risk of like diarrhea or upset stomach. But diarrhea is a very real possibility. Trust me, I've done this a number of times. If there's too much sulfur in the water. And so I'm like, oh, it's been too long. I can't remember like how strong or how weak the smell needs to be before it's going to mess me up. I don't have any toilet paper in my car, and I'm hundreds of miles from anything. So I risked it, right? And the water comes out. It is straight up brown water. Straight up brown water. And I catch it in my Nalgene bottle, and my hand is hot holding the Nalgene bottle. It came out of the ground hot. Not like boiling, not like coffee hot, but not like tepid. It was straight up like hot cocoa hot. And I was like, oh, brown hot sulfur water. This is what I get to drink. I was so thirsty that I downed a full Nalgene bottle, 32 ounces. And kind of waited a couple minutes to see if it was going to work me over, right? I don't know if you guys have that, but you know the water cooler in the office? And every so often, like somebody's getting a drink out of the water cooler, and the water doesn't just slowly lower, like it lowers in stages. I don't know, something with the air bubbles or whatever. And every so often it goes, and like the whole thing just kind of lowers and all these bubbles come up. Well, I've got intestinal issues, and I call it the water cooler effect. And so I was waiting for the water cooler effect. Am I going to get that? And if I get that, that is my body's signal that I have about 37 seconds to explosive diarrhea. Sorry that this story is gross. It's not as gross as other stories that I could tell. Having lived with potential explosive diarrhea for 20 years now, I've got plenty of interesting stories. This is not one of those. I was waiting for the water cooler effect. It didn't happen. And so then I filled it up some more. And I filled up all of my Nalgene bottles. And so I have hot, brown sulfur water to drink through the rest of Death Valley. And so I left that lovely little place, Stovepipe Wells, and I drove down the road. I drove through Death Valley. I stopped at a couple lookouts, and it was actually really amazing. I guess this only happens every 50 to 100 years, but there had recently been a rain, and it never rains in Death Valley. And so when it does, there are all these dormant wildflowers that lay in like a stasis, a dehydrated stasis. And when it rains, all of a sudden the whole thing just blossoms. It's beautiful. It was really amazing. And it was kind of an incredible timing because I didn't like go there for that or whatever. I just happened to be driving through. And then I started running out of gas. I was driving a Kia Rio, which is a tiny little car. And I'm like, I need some gas, right? And I had enough cell signal to like look at my phone and be like, okay, I see a building on this road I'm on. And so I was going. And And I pulled in. It was a cafe. And now I'm like, I don't even know where. I should measure this out. Literally, if there's a place that is the middle of nowhere, it is this place. And I walked in, and the waitress looked at me and said, "What are you doing here?" It's like, that's how she greets a customer, is, "What are you doing here?" And I thought to myself, what are you doing here? Like, there's a restaurant hundreds of miles from anything in the middle of nowhere. It was like an old mission, sort of, that had been like converted into a ghost town cafe. They still serve food. And I said, "I'm running out of gas. I'm on fumes right now. Like, I'm like the light's on, it's on empty." And I was like, "I'm running out of gas." And she said, "There's no gas station here." I said, "Well, where's the closest gas station?" She's like, "It's in Pahrump, Nevada." I wasn't even out of California yet. It's like, where is Pahrump, Nevada? And the only thing that I could think of was this West Wing episode. Have you guys seen that? The West Wing episode where they go to Pahrump and they get trapped by the cops? And I was like, I didn't even know that was a real town. And two, it was like 60 miles away. And I'm already like gaslight on, like the needle is like resting on the pin next to the empty. So it can't go any further because there's that little pink, and it was just sitting on it. And I was like, oh my gosh. Anyway, so I made it to Pahrump. The point of that story is it reminded me of what it's like to work with rusty pipes. This is a super long and roundabout way of getting to that, but I remember in older homes and farm places that I had been growing up, that if you wanted to get a drink, and there was like rusty pipes, what you needed to do is you let the water run until it was clear. And so I couldn't do that with the pump in that lovely resort town of Stovepipe Wells, but still trips me out that that place exists and that there are people there. You've got to go. If you ever have a chance, please go to Stovepipe Wells. Just because it's surreal, like you feel like you're an episode of The Twilight Zone. I couldn't do it there because the ground was hot and it was obviously a sulfur tapped well. But if the water source is good and the pipes are rusty, then what you have is a situation where inside of the pipes, water sits and it starts stagnating and it takes on a metallic and sometimes even colored attribute, right? It tastes like rust. You're probably getting tons of really healthy, heavy metals that'll sit in your system for years or whatever. And so in those situations, those pumps or faucets or whatever, you turn it on, you let it run clear, right? So it'll run rusty water for a little while, dirty water, brownish, kind of an orange situation. And then eventually clear water will start coming. And the reason for that is like the source is clean and clear, but the pipes are trapping the stagnated water, right? And this is what it feels like to me. And I don't think this is everybody. I mean, I listen to some people talk about the way that they draw and the way that they work, and they can literally like sit down and do half an hour, do 45 minutes and bust out good stuff. And for me, it's like, I've got to fight the resistance. I've got to sit down and I've got to force all that bad water out, and run that water until it goes clear, until I get to the source, the clear, pure source of the water, before I start hitting anything that's good, right? And so for me, that takes time. It's never happened faster than 30 minutes. And usually it's about 45. And so last night was the first time in probably a week and a half where I had put in more than a 45-minute session. I've been drawing and working on this every day, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here. But it was all rusty water. because I'd turn it on for a second, and then I'd turn it off, and then I'd come back the next day or a few hours later and turn it on for a second and turn it off, right? But last night, I ran that water until it was clear, and then it was just beautiful, no sulfur, no rust, and I just flowed with it. And I felt different this morning. I woke up this morning and I was excited to get back to the drawing table. I was excited to get through my day so that I could get home and get into that feeling again. And all of this is to say that for me, and I'm not saying that this is the right or wrong thing for everybody, and I think everybody works differently. For me, small chunks of time are helpful for practice. I'm going to draw the thumb for half an hour. I'm going to draw the clavicle, for 10 minutes. I'm going to draw just observational drawing, right? For like learning things, half an hour is super good. Skill sets, understanding, the human elbow or something. 30 minutes at a time is awesome. For clearing out the pipes and getting some real creativity and getting into that groove where I'm not fighting the tools and I'm not fighting the lines and I'm not fighting the work anymore. I phase over, I switch into a mode of thinking that is very relaxing and cathartic, and I get a ton of work done. For me, that takes 30 to 45 minutes to get to that point. And so my new rule is this, at least for the next 2 months. I'm going to try this for 2 months and see what happens. My new rule is I will sit down for 12 hours a week minimum. I'm going to try to hit 20 some weeks. 12 hours minimum. And no session where I'm actually working on my project. I'm not talking about teaching myself stuff or studying things or whatever. But no session will be shorter than 90 minutes. But that also means that I will not have to do it every day. I can, and likely I will. But for me, going 7 days a week, pushing hard on something, is a recipe for burnout and a negative feedback loop that starts to negatively impact my work. For me, I need to recharge. I need a bike ride. I need, I need to go rock climbing. I need to play some video games. I need to get out there and experience life and do stuff. Hang out with my wife. Go on a walk with my daughter or whatever. I need to like get out there and play a little bit as well. And so, in every 3-day period, I will have a minimum of 6 hours work in every 3-day period. And so that means that if I do a 6-hour session and I feel like taking a day off because I'm burnout or whatever, I do that. And I can come back the third day, having not done anything the day before, knowing that 2 days before I did 6 hours, I can do another hour and a half, 2 hours. I'm good, right? I'm ahead of the game. But if I don't do anything one day, the next day I need to do something. Because I've got at least 3 hours that I need to do on that day, to keep up. And so for me, that's a really good way to work. And I will continue to report on this as I go. So anyway, so that's it. So my minimum 12. I don't have like a catchy name for it or a hashtag or even a challenge for you guys or whatever. But if you want to jump in on it, that'd be cool. I don't know. Maybe somebody else can name it something awesome. But minimum 12 per week and a minimum 90 per session. And 3 days don't go by without doing 6 hours. And that is my plan moving forward. And so, so basically I'm going to keep working on this piece. And it is now 10:49. I talked for a really long time. I did that sticker swap thing and I didn't get home too early. So making progress on this piece. I will make a lot more progress as we go. So anyway, appreciate you guys listening, commenting, and everything. I'm curious in the comments if you will let me know what is, not necessarily what you're doing right now, but what is your optimum work schedule on your personal projects. So if you're doing a graphic novel, you're producing posters, you're making stickers, you're working on a short film, or whatever it is, Do short chunks work for you? Shorter, more frequent chunks, or longer sessions, with breaks mixed in, or just longer sessions in general. What's your optimum? What's working for that? I'd be curious. I'm really quite curious in how other people are doing things, because for me, burnout is a real issue, and that negative feedback cycle is a trigger for a number of things that drastically and negatively impact my mindset into a destructive way that isn't good. So let me know in the comments what you think. I'm curious what you found that works, what doesn't work for you personally. And I think this will be helpful for everybody to learn from everybody else. Maybe you're not like me, and that is likely, since we are not the same person. And if two people are alike, one of them is not needed. So, and maybe you're like me. Maybe you're like, yeah, that I like that. Or maybe you haven't figured out your groove yet. You haven't figured out, where your path of least resistance is for your creativity. How you dance with your muse. And try out some things. Try some different things. So I think a lot of these things are great. A lot of the challenges out there are awesome. But also just sustainable, consistent practices I think are really good too. So anyway, let me know. Let me know what you think. And as always, you can catch my stuff at corykerr.com. I've just uploaded a new way to organize these videos. If you go to corykerr.com/videos, you'll see I've organized the playlist on my website there, and those pages automatically update and all that, and that's kind of cool. In addition to that, you can catch updates on the drawings that I'm doing on Instagram, and my random thoughts as I come across this stuff on Twitter. And if you like this video, then hit that little thumbs up button. And if you haven't already, subscribe. And if you haven't already, hit that little bell so you get notifications when I post these. I'll catch you guys later. I'm Cory Kerr, and I'm out. Yeah.